There are 81 mascots in NCAA football, and today I'm going to put them all in a tournament. I ranked and seeded each team in their region based on real life records, but every mascot is a 99 overall in game, so anybody can win this crazy playoff. Unfortunately, not every school had a mascot included when this game was released, so you'll have to watch closely to see if your favorite college made the cut. To start the playoff, we'll be in the North section, and there are 4 or 5 playing games per region. The Eagles versus the Sun Devils is the opening match, and Boston College came out on top. Seeding wise, that was technically an upset, but we gotta keep going through the games because there are 80 total matchups in this tournament. The Zips came so close to pulling off the upset over Cal, but they couldn't quite do it. The winner of this game would play Clemson next, and it seemed like Army wanted all the smoke. With the North region's playing games finalized, it was time to start the round of 64, and the Eagles were fighting to upset 1 seed Alabama. With a minute left, they were only down by 3, but unfortunately, their quarterback threw a game-ending interception, and if you haven't noticed, I'll be playing through each region one at a time, so these sections will come later. The Razorbacks ended up taking down the East Carolina Pirates, and in the next game featuring the Boise State Broncos, they barely survived against the Colorado Buffaloes. When 2 basketball schools faced off, the Blue Devils came out on top, and then there was a chance the 3-seeded Bearcats got upset, but in the end, they persevered and won by 10. Normally, Bears and Tigers are fairly matched, however, it seemed like Auburn had a slight edge, and they somehow upset 6-seed Baylor as an 11-seed. That wasn't the end of the surprises either, as the Cougars beat Air Force, and 18-seeded Army led the Tigers in the second quarter. They were keeping it very close, but with 1 second left, even though they had a chance to win it, they couldn't pull it off. That was the last game in the round of 64 in the North region, so it was time for the next round, and the Razorbacks were trying their hardest to upset Alabama. In overtime, the Crimson Tide settled for 3, which led to 8-seeded Arkansas scoring an incredible walk-off, game-winning touchdown. The Blue Devils didn't have any issues as they dominated the Broncos with ease, and even though that game was boring, the next one was not. 11-seeded Auburn was trying to upset the Cincinnati Bearcats, and they had their chance in overtime. With the game tied, they won on this 2-point conversion, and that was one of the biggest shockers yet. Only 4 teams remained in the North region, and despite Arkansas's best efforts to continue their run, the Blue Devils held their ground, and after Clemson survived against Auburn, the Elite 8 North region matchup was set. The Tigers didn't seem to have any troubles, and they were the first team to advance to the Final Four. But now, it was time for the South region to play their games, and the 17-seeded Michigan State Spartans weren't going to make it to the next round as their last-second Hail Mary attempt fell short. In the next matchup, Navy became the first 20 seed to win a game, scoring a touchdown in the final seconds, and all of these close finishes made this tournament incredibly entertaining. As the 18th seed, the Hurricanes ended up beating 15-seeded Houston, and that would be the last playing game of the South region, so it was time for the round of 64, which started off with the biggest shock yet as the Cyclones beat 1-seeded Georgia. With this result, Iowa would play their rivals in the next round, and the Jayhawks were a one-and-done team. Unfortunately, Navy's run ended against Mississippi State, and in a matchup of Tigers, it was close, but LSU ended up surviving. When the Cats took on the Dogs, Kentucky won, and besides Georgia's loss, the SEC was cruising. Despite leading 28-0 at one point, the 18-seeded Hurricanes barely pulled off the upset, but they still got it done, and the South region was delivering more surprises like that than expected. The most interesting event in Iowa was this mascot matchup, and it was a complete blowout. Mississippi State asserted their dominance on the Gophers, and the Wildcats edged past the Tigers. Miami didn't start off well in their game, but with a minute left, the Hurricanes somehow still had a chance to tie it up, and they managed to get into the end zone on this play. However, they failed on the 2-point conversion, and the underdogs fell to the Gators. Anyway, now there are only 4 teams left in the South region, and after this win, the Mississippi State Bulldogs were looking like the best team left. They'd be playing the winner of Kentucky and Florida, and in the end, the Gators won by 10. But with a spot in the Final Four on the line, they struggled. Mississippi State would be moving on, and that was the last game of the South region. There were plenty of exciting games to look forward to in the East section, and the first one went to overtime where Nebraska was victorious. Since there were 21 teams in this region, Northwestern was the only 21 seed, and they upset Syracuse in overtime. I had never seen a tree throw a football before, but they must not be good at it, with Stanford being a first-round exit, and I couldn't believe Rice upset Oklahoma. With a few seconds left, Ohio had a chance to win it, but they couldn't do it, and that would conclude all 5 of the East region's play-in games. I told you all that this tournament would be full of upsets, and it looked like the 17 seed Nebraska would pull one off, but they choked in the end. The Wolfpack ended up beating Purdue with this clutch last-second 53-yarder, and the Leprechauns of Notre Dame knocked out the 21 seed. The Beavers won their first matchup by 18, and then Rice pulled off one of the biggest upsets of the tournament, as the 19 seed beat the 3-seeded Ducks. The must-watch games didn't end there either, with South Alabama battling the Gamecocks, but in the end, the Jaguars fell just short of pulling off what would have been another upset in this playoff. The Tar Heels were barely able to survive against the Panthers, and then Rutgers' dream of moving on to the next round was crushed. Surprisingly, in the East region, Rice was the only underdog that made it through to the round of 32, and the top seeds continued to pull out close wins. With this result, Notre Dame would get Ohio State in the next round, but first we would have to see if the Owls could continue their remarkable run, and unfortunately the Gamecocks escaped with the win, so there weren't any more underdogs in this part of the bracket. It was time for this section's Sweet 16 games, and the 1 seed Ohio State took a lead with 97 seconds left. That would be enough to move on, and in the other matchups, South Carolina couldn't do anything offensively. So the East region finale was set, and with a little more than a minute and a half left, it was a tie game. So the Nittany Lions fought their hardest to get into the end zone, taking a lead, and that would be enough to send them into the Final Four as they escaped this extremely tough bracket. But before the Final Four started, there was still one more region of games that needed to be played, and the 17-seeded Cavaliers opened up the West section with a win. In the next matchup, it was a back-and-forth overtime battle, but the Bulls lost on this 2-point conversion fail. Things got good when the 19-seeded Western Michigan Broncos pulled off the upset over UAB and the Hokies as an 18 seed took down the Commodores. With the playing games being done after that, it was time for the final round of 64 matchups, and Virginia was giving 1-seeded TCU all sorts of issues. They made this game a back-and-forth shootout, but this was ruled just short and the Horned Frogs would win. The Red Raiders would also do the same, and surprisingly, the 12-seeded Mountaineers would take down UCLA, who came into the playoffs as a 5 seed. Utah barely avoided an upset loss to the Hilltoppers, and the Huskies ruined Western Michigan's hopes of making a deep run in the tournament. The Badgers gave the Longhorns an easy win, and I couldn't believe how little of a fight the Knights put up. The last matchup in this round was the Volunteers and the Hokies, and the 18 seed left losers. With that result, there were only 8 teams remaining in the West region, and the 1-seeded Horned Frogs were in trouble against the Red Raiders as they failed this 4th down conversion and lost. The Mountaineers couldn't beat the 4-seeded Utes, and even though the Longhorns fought their hardest, they fell just short of upsetting the Huskies and going on to the Sweet 16. If Washington State won, they'd play their rivals next, and this extremely clutch interception would seal the deal for them. Now that there were only 4 teams left, it was going to get good, or so I thought. The Utes annihilated the Red Raiders, but at least this rivalry game could end well. The Cougars had one last chance to tie it up, which didn't go as planned, so it was down to these teams for a Final Four spot. The game came down to the wire, and the Huskies had their chance to take the lead and win, but they were just short, so that would conclude all of the West region's games. The championship bracket was set, and the Final Four began with the 2-seeded Tigers against the 4-seeded Bulldogs. It did not disappoint, as it was a back-and-forth battle that came down to the very end, and with 40 seconds left, the Bulldogs sent a ballsy blitz, which would send them to the championship game. In the other matchup, the Nittany Lions seemed to have a slight edge until their quarterback threw this interception, which the Utes would take all the way down to the Penn State 12-yard line. They would go on to tie the game up with this throw, but they still managed to blow it and lose in the end. So now the Mascot National Championship was set between the Nittany Lions and the Bulldogs, and by the third quarter, it was still a one-possession game. Mississippi State got a safety with this sack, but the Nittany Lions fought hard to stay in it. And with 51 seconds left, they would have an opportunity to go down and win it. However, this interception would seal the game for the Bulldogs, and Mississippi State was the Mascot national champions.